Um, One of the things that kind of, you know, that resonated that I think about is when I was young, my father and I, we took a lot of road trips, and anytime we were passing near Poston, we'd stop by, and I just remember there being less and less left of it over the years, and that was so tragic to me. I felt like it was forgotten. So it really means a lot that people like you are preserving this. And my father too, when I showed him all of the documentaries on Canopy and such that are out there, he was really amazed that there was so much interest. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's very meaningful. Um, did your so your father was detained separately for 3 years?
So my
And
father actually wasn't detained. It was
oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, your
my great grandfather. He was
great-grandfather. Yeah.
he was so he was detained separately and bounced around to different places. After the FBI took him, from the information my grandmother and her sister and just family have told me, is that you know Toshi, which was the oldest at the time, was the one that was allowed to go visit him.
Hmm.
He was allowed to have one visitor, and it wasn't often. It was like on certain times. I don't know how often she was allowed to go. Um, but my grandma, after that day, after seeing him being detained by the FBI, she didn't get to see him until about 3 years later when he actually joined um, in Topaz, Utah, so Delta, Utah, where the camps were. And that's where she went. She went to Tamfran first, then she went to Topaz, and then my great grandfather went to New Mexico. He was in Arizona, and then he eventually made his way to Topaz.
Did she talk about, I mean, it must have been so hard for her being, what was she, maybe 15 years old or something, and
Yeah.
to be uprooted, put in an internment camp, and then not have her father for 3 years. Did she ever talk about that?
Yeah, yeah. She didn't talk about that growing up. She only started talking about that when I started this whole process.
Hmm.
It wasn't something that, like I said, was really discussed in my family, and my great grandfather never discussed it. And she would try to ask him to talk about it, and he just never really wanted to. And a lot of that generation was kind of the same way, from what I was told. And so, and even like with my grandmother, at first she didn't want to do it, and I was telling her, this is, I'm trying to document the family history. It's kind of something we're going to be passed down for family generations. Because at the time, my plan was not to hit the festival route or distribution for education or any of that. It was truly just to have something that I can pass down to my son, to my family, to their kids or whatever. So, yeah, but after I started filming and her, by the end of it, she was like telling me what to do. She knew everything, so she got really into it. And then she was telling, you should go talk to this person. You should go. You should really try to put this. Like, I brought some stuff. Like, I have the yearbook from Topaz and
Hmm.
shirts
Oh,
and
wow.
her identification card and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So she was like really wanting me to start document and preserve
Hmm.
this. That's the end of it.
Well, that's really cool. So she started directing the directors.
Yeah, which that's fine. She has every right to direct me to tell me whatever she wants me to do.
One of the things that jumped out to me that was kind of fairly unique about your story was that your family was able to keep their business after the war. And so I was just curious, A, what was life like after the war for them? And then how did that come to be that they were able to keep their business?
Yeah, so they actually had someone watch over the hotel while they were gone. So they set that up when they knew that, things were gonna get confiscated. They had to, like she's talked about, she had to burn stuff, that was
Right.
um, considered a threat. And so the hotel, with some complications in the beginning with accepting payments in the banks and stuff like that, because just all this hysteria was going on too. And so, they had someone that I think worked for them and to just make the payments while they were gone, and then they had all the account information and try to keep the hotel running while they were gone, and they didn't get much business, but they were able to keep it afloat. And then when they got out of the camps, they actually weren't allowed to go back to the West Coast for about a year. And so a lot of people went to Chicago. I don't. This wasn't talked about in the documentary, but there's a big influence of Japanese culture in Chicago, and so that's where they went. And then afterwards, they went back, to San Francisco when they were allowed to. But times were hard. It wasn't easy for them. Racism was still very rampant, and a lot of people didn't trust the Japanese. And even in Chicago, after the camps, they were given like not much money for the 4 years or 3.5 years that they were there, 4 years, whatever, that they were there, and so they had to make means with that, but then they couldn't find jobs, so no one wanted to hire them. So it was a struggle for them. Yeah, and at the hotel, things eventually got picked up, but burnt down. So
And when we were talking before, you said that I mean, the film, you said it burned down under mysterious circumstances, but I think you mentioned that you'd actually seen reports listing it as arson. Is that?
yeah, so there's actually news clippings that so again, when I was making this, I was just filming it to document it and gathering as much as I could at the time. Afterwards, family was still giving me clippings. Even 2 years ago, people were
Mm,
giving me stuff from both sides of the family, and my aunt actually gave me two copies of the clippings of the Aki Hotel, and it says like arson, and so they actually, um, you know, it was arson according to these clippings that my I have in my possession. But um, my grandma stated that, but she said she wasn't sure, and then I didn't want to just say it was arson without proof.
right.
But after the film, now I know. So
Huh. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Um, and you said that one of the reasons why you made the film was to preserve the history, and I don't know if you have more than one child. I met your son last time,
yeah,
um,
grabbing my
but
face for every bit of attention.
but I was wondering if you've ever shown the film, if your son has seen the film or other kids have seen the film, and their
No,
reaction was.
he hasn't seen the film. That was actually I have not seen that film um, in a while, and I kind of got emotional after watching it, just because a lot of family stuff. And so I've shown him pictures of my grandmother. Um, he wouldn't sit through that right now. He's only 2, but if I put on like some Disney movie, he would be way more. But um, well, the rest of my family has from the Matsuno and Kataoka side and the Sato side, and so they're very proud of this film and they're very grateful for this film too. And that was one thing that was really cool is so in Nishi Bay and in San Francisco, um, we got to show this film and premiere the film. I was invited to show the film in the actual uh, setting where everything went down, and it was packed. The theater was packed. My grandmother got to go, her sister got to go,
Hmm.
um, and Toshi, who's the one that I found the VHS footage from like '92 or something. I just randomly found it. She got to go, so it was really neat for our entire family to be there and to have the community around them and be like, oh yeah, some of the older generation are like, I remember the Aki Hotel. I was like, really? You remember the Aki Hotel? So that was like really cool to talk about. Yeah, they'd be like, it's right here, um, 1651 Post Street, I think was the address. So yeah,
I looked that up on Google Maps or whatever.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
The parking.
Product placement, but yeah, as it's kind of interesting that it's what now it's part of the property of the Kabuki Hotel, the big hotel in Japantown that's been
Mhm.
there for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really cool though that your family, it seems like a lot of them were pretty, didn't really want to talk about it to begin with.
Yeah.
But it wound up being this really nice thing for them, and it seems like they opened up as
Yeah. And,
as it
and
got shared.
And so my grandpa's sister, Toshi, who's found the old footage. She was very open about it. You know, her side of the family wanted to document her story as well. She was able to remember. She can still remember. She's still super sharp and still super active, which is great. But it was really neat to document that and digitize that and just sit through and watch it and then hear some of those stories that I captured my grandma tell because they were at the same camp
Mhm.
and line them up together like 20 years later. So
Hmm.
that was really neat to be able to go through something like that and um, just the learning experience through it all.
Yeah, that's that had to be amazing. Um, but my father, he was 7 when he went in, and
Mhm.
so he was a little kid, and um, he's always wanted to learn more. He didn't really understand a lot of things that were going on or what was
Right,
happening or why, and but so he'd always try to talk about it, but not so many of the family members were interested in talking about it. It was just bad times. They didn't want to talk about it.
right.
They're opening up a little bit more now, but that's really great that you had such a breakthrough.
Yeah, thank you. And it's great that you said that your father spoke about it a lot when you were younger.
Yeah, yeah, which I feel really lucky. It's an important part of my life. It's an important part of growing up, and I certainly feel grateful for not having to have gone through all the things that he and his family did. But but yeah, so we talked about it a lot. We still talk about it a lot. He lives next door to me. But yeah, for me, it was really important, and so that adds another layer to why I think it's great that your initial reason for doing this was to preserve it for the family
Hmm.
and to pass that on. I think it's
Yeah,
important to know the history.
absolutely.
And I'm sorry.
No, I just found a question in the chat that
Oh yeah.
I'd like to share with both of you. So this is from Andy, and he's asking, does the director or anyone on tonight know if Bay Area internees may have gone to Minidoka? A recent book was published on this, and he's sharing a link to it. So
I'm not quite sure. I know that a lot of people in the Bay Area went to Tan Fran first, the racetrack, and then they went to Topaz afterwards. I'm not, at least my family. I don't know. I can't answer that question. I know that a lot of people in Los Angeles went to Manzanar, and I think Santa Anita Racetrack before Manzanar. So I'm not 100% sure on that front, and I think in Sacramento um, they went somewhere else too. So I'm not 100% sure. Sorry.
great.
Were there other questions that you want to look at, Rika?
Yeah, so we have about 10 minutes, a little bit of time for discussions,
Oh,
questions. Yeah. So if you have anything to share, it does not even have to be a question. This kind of space is just incredibly connecting. So if anyone wants to share your impressions, maybe how your own family history might relate to the Kataoka family's history or Tadashi's history, or that would be great. Benjamin is asking, how did the kids push the boundaries?
In what sense, Benjamin?
Benjamin, would you like to maybe unmute yourself, and then perhaps it would be great for you to kind of expand on that question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Um,
Hi, Benjamin.
I was wondering how like all kids, especially teenagers, push the boundaries, and in this case there were literal boundaries,
Mhm.
and I was wondering how they express themselves and sort of push the boundaries in being playful and children
Yeah,
as they also are.
great.
Does anyone have any stories for those?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, when the camps were built, they established school systems too. They had sports, They had dances. They had a bunch of different activities that they can do. So the younger kids, they really, they were taught. They were allowed to play with other children. It's not ideal at all. It was completely wrong, but they were still able to play with each other and still use their imagination. Like I think a good example of using your imagination are building those rock gardens, right? Like you're building something from nothing, literally, and they were beautiful. So the power of the mind and the power of imagination is something that kids have that is very strong, and so I think that just helped build their bond together. And so, like even teenagers, right? So my auntie Toshi, she met her husband in the camps, right? And if it wasn't for the camps, which I thought was such a cute and awesome moment, is that, she says, like, yes, the camps are bad, but if it wasn't for the camps, you kids wouldn't be here. And she finds those precious moments in the midst of darkness, in situations like that, which I think is incredible. Honestly, I think that's just a beautiful thing. So, and of course, there were kids that revolted. There's Tule Lake, where a lot of people went to that weren't the best people, and so, or they did the no. There's the no yes questionnaire, right? Would you serve your country? These questions that they would ask the Japanese as they were detained, and so kids push the boundaries their own way. Every kid's different, so I think that they had the resources to be able to still be children, but then they still push their boundaries in their own way. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Myles. Tadashi, would you like to ask something? Your dad was a little kid.
Yeah,
He was in the camp.
he was a little kid, and he said he was young enough that he feels fortunate that he didn't understand what was going on, and as he'd say, it was like a big sandbox being in Poston. But one of the things I think I shared with you, Myles, when we talked before was, the kids would entertain themselves in some, they have nothing. But one of the things that they would do is they would lie down in the desert and pretend to be dead and wait for the vultures to come, and they would have this like game of who would let the vultures get closest to them. So they definitely made their own entertainment of what they had around them. But as far as the pushing the boundaries, yeah, I agree with Myles that I've certainly heard a lot about all of the controversy of the split in opinion of those who say we're in this camp, but we're going to be 110% American and show them that we're as American as anybody else, and the other ones who felt the opposite way and said, why should we put up with this? Why should we go and fight for the country when the country is doing this to us and our family? So yeah.
Thank you, Tadashi. So we have more questions coming in. So moving on to Kim's question. Hi, Kim. He's a librarian from Skyline College, by the way. Thank you for coming. Did the internees continue to experience racism after the camp? I heard Japanese Americans were not allowed to study medicine to be a doctor for many years.
Oh, I haven't heard that about the doctor, but yeah, they continue to face extreme racism for years after the camps, and even prior to the camps. And so yeah, they sadly, that was still very rampant.
Yeah.
Tadashi, would you like to add some story about what happens after the release from the camp?
Yeah. So, well, let me start off with before the war. My grandfather, who had come from Japan, he had been able to start a business. He had a beverage distribution warehouse in downtown LA, serving the area, and I don't think they were rich, but doing okay. But of course, they lost all of that, and so after the war, like Myles' family, they wound up relocating to Chicago, where there's a Japanese community and a little bit less racism. But they grew up very poor. And it was It was rough on the family. I mean, there's the racism, but then there's also the fallout of the racism, the economic damage and such.
Yeah, and I see Anne's comment. I thought that the older people making a garden with the stones and the shells was so beautiful.
Mm.
Inspired people keep hope in the camp. Yeah, I agree that this whole resilience that I heard in Myles' grandma's comment of I was also shiawase despite all that. And in Japanese language, shiawase is not a it's a sparingly used word. It's a heavy word. It's not that casual word like happy in English. And it was amazing for me to hear that after all that, she calls her like shiawase. And that was a very good quote, I thought.
Yeah, I thought so too. Like when I read her legacy letter, a lot of that voiceover, I had her read her legacy letter that she wrote a long time ago. And, you know, when I got to that, that's at the very end of her legacy letter. And I was just thinking and reflecting back on everything that she's been through, everything that she had seen, you know, growing up as a kid. And she was still, you know, felt very fortunate and still very happy and very like, you know, lucky to have lived the life that she did. And you know, I hope that at the end of my life, I can say the same. You know, I want to, and I think that's just that's such a beautiful quote that she said and that she wrote.
And I actually have one question that is more movie making question. This is from Fiona. Did any other films influence your approach to making this film? This is for Myles.
Sorry, what? You broke up a little bit. What did you
Oh,
say?
sorry. So that question was, did any other films influence your approach to making this film?
No, honestly, this was my first documentary that I ever made. My background is narrative. Well, actually, that's a little. I made a really cheesy documentary in college, which I'll never show anybody. Yeah, so I watched a lot of documentary films. I've seen Come See the Paradise. I've seen other films, you know, Farewell to Manzanar. But in terms of having something that kind of inspired me to make this or influence or influenced me to make something like this, it was just honestly just I just wanted to make it and I just wanted to capture my family, and there was no agenda behind it besides just the honesty behind that, you know. So it's there was no script or storyboard when I started it. I just captured as much as I could and had hundreds of hours of footage that I had to shift through and try to figure out how to make this thing, and then that's what it is today.
Okay, so I see one more question. He's saying, I find it intriguing that despite being persecuted, the Japanese American community hasn't picked up the torch alongside their Black African American brothers and sisters who are also persecuted, or the Latino farm workers. Why not?
I'm going to make a plug right now to a film that talks about that. It's called Reparations by John O'Malley.
Absolutely.
We're very close. And so if you can, try to check that out or just read up on that. It's a great film.
And one thing that this certainly brought up in me and a lot of other Japanese Americans is the kind of Islamophobia that has been going on, the treatment of Muslims and over the years. That's something that I've been pleased to see a lot of Japanese Americans concerned with. And in fact, one time I was out visiting Manzanar, and there was a whole group of Muslim students out there, along with some Japanese Americans, and they were kind of holding their own ceremony out there and kind of a statement of unity.
Yeah, I agree. And also Japanese Americans have demonstrated that the former camps that President Trump tried to turn into a detention camp, and the Tsu rising, that they were sit-ins and then rallies against that kind of, injustice that they suffered themselves. So we can probably share lots of like moments of racial solidarity between Japanese American communities and other racialized groups. And Sayuri has this great question. Have you added Japanese subtitle to share with Japanese in Japan?
That is a great question. I have not yet, but I'm definitely going to.
That'd be great. I am actually Japanese immigrant from Japan. It's very interesting how much Japanese people don't know about the history of Japanese Americans in the United States,
Right.
and how we Japanese immigrants don't have any connections with Japanese American communities when we share the same history and the same ethnicity. So that'd be great to add the subtitles.
Yeah.
Well, we're wrapping up on the hour. Do you, either of you have anything else you want to close off with or say?
Yeah. Could I throw
Yeah,
in
please.
one final question? Myles, did your grandmother ever forgive her husband for prioritizing buying that car over getting engaged to him?
I have no idea, but when she said that story, I was trying so hard not to laugh. Oh my goodness. But it's so funny. She's such a crack up. I miss her so much. She's such a crack up.
Yeah. Thanks. I just had to ask.
Well, I want to thank the three of you for being here today. Thank you, Myles, for making such an important film. It's really is a good testament for your family, for sure. And thank you both, Tadashi and Rika, for fielding questions and doing the discussion. We appreciate it.